Diolch everyone for coming today. As Richard has said, I'm going to talk about the introduction of votes at 16. As you can tell by the title of the report, a lot of things that we're going to talk about today are about how the implementation didn't work, but also just to stress that it was virtually impossible for it to work in the context that it was introduced. So vote 16, in this case, Wales, it was the first time in Wales that that people aged 16 and 17 could vote. But as I've said, it was introduced in incredibly difficult circumstances. The education system was in disarray, and the expert panel on vote 16 Senate reform discussed how an education system was one of the key things that was needed to coincide with the introduction of vote 16 for it to work, and the electoral system was in disarray at the time because of the pandemic. That said, with that put out there, we're going to look at what we can tell you, hopefully, and that is where we're hoping that we can be of interest. The headlines of the report are that the levels of knowledge and engagement of 16 and 17-year-olds is very comparable to other young age groups in Wales. Some of the differences in older cohorts were replicated, things like engagement associating with the Welsh language and medium of education. But this is something that's really key, is that not many people talked about votes at 16. Not many people were necessarily aware of this and engaging with it. Only 28% of those in our survey talked about votes at 16 in school or outside of school. And so there's a lot to be done in terms of engaging young people and ensuring that this is something that they're talking about if we want to kind of engage them in Welsh politics. So I've talked about some of the caveats already. Another big caveat is that the goal of vote 16 is to increase engagement in politics in the long term. So that means that while we're going to talk about what happened in this one election, we can't tell if it worked just from one election. Instead, this report's a baseline for future studies. I've talked already about the difficult circumstances, so I won't repeat myself. And we've conducted this research using survey data. It's in, I think, the first study of its kind to use quantitative data in Wales, but there's some work that needs to be done in improving that. So with these health warnings out of the way, let's dive in. So as I've said, vote 16 was introduced to improve youth engagement in Welsh politics in the long term. The idea is that if you lower the voting age to 16, you introduce people to the electorate at a time when they're still in school or college. They're able to talk about the policy, talk about politics in a school environment with their friends, with their teachers, gain information in a way that won't necessarily happen when they're 18 because they're too busy in work, too busy in university, and life gets in the way. Critics of this policy say that, well, young people are already disengaged, so by introducing more young people into the electorate, you're just introducing more disengaged people. But the idea is that if you get people talking about politics in a kind of more institutionalized setting, then you might be able to get them more engaged from the off, and that's not what's happening with people who are voting when they are 18 or older. As just to reiterate, we can't tell whether this goal has been a success from just one election. That's a long-term goal of the policy, but let's see what we can find out. So one of the key metrics for engagement in politics is turnout, whether people bother to vote. Often, young people are the least likely to vote, and ultimately, we find that 16 and 17-year-olds, that's true again of 16 and 17-year-olds, but they're not that different from other age groups. What this graph here shows is the likelihood of someone saying, yes, I will vote. How likely are you to vote on a scale of 0 to 10? And this is the average of people in these different age groups. So you've got 16 and 17-year-olds on my right, and then going through to the older age groups on my left. And you can see that 16 and 17-year-olds are among the least likely to say that they will vote in the Senedd election, but they're not that different than people under the age of 55. So, yes, obviously, we would like, people who support vote 16 would like younger people to be more engaged, but 16 and 17-year-olds are not uniquely disengaged in Welsh politics. We see that again when we look at political interest. So each of these graphs show, again, the average. We ask people, how interested are you in the Senedd election, in Westminster politics, in politics in Wales in general, and then politics in the wider world. And these graphs here, again, show the mean score. So higher scores mean that someone's more interested, lower scores mean that a group is less interested. And you can see that the younger age groups still have some of the lower levels of interest in each of these areas, with older people being more interested in politics in general. But 16 and 17-year-olds are not uniquely disengaged. They're not totally excluded or disinterested in Welsh politics. They're very similar to those under 55, who obviously can vote. What about their knowledge of Welsh politics? So, of the key headlines here relating to age is that younger people, again, are the least likely to say that, the least likely to exhibit knowledge in Welsh politics and Westminster politics. So these graphs here show for each of the leaders, party leaders at the time in Wales and the party leaders at the time in Westminster, whether the people were asked, do you like the leaders of these parties? And what we're displaying here is the amount of people who say don't know. And what we often consider don't know in this context to be is whether you don't know anything about those leaders. So you're not going to give a response. And you can see, so on the side that says Wales, those are the number of people who said don't know for Mark Drakeford, Adam Price and Andrew R.T. Davis. And younger people are consistently more likely to say that they don't know about the Plaid Cymru and the Welsh Conservative leader, and also Mark Drakeford. But Mark Drakeford's in a rather unique situation at the time where, because of the pandemic, his profile was much larger than any kind of devolved leader has had at in previous elections. And you can see that the same dynamic is shown when we look at Westminster politics, where younger people are more likely to say that they don't know what they think about Keir Starmer, Nicola Sturgeon, Boris Johnson. But the levels of don't knows about Westminster politics are much lower. So people do feel that they are more informed about Westminster politics than Welsh politics. So this is something that needs to improve amongst young people. But it's true across age groups, where people are consistently more likely to say that they know something about the Westminster leader than they do the Welsh leader. So that's something that, yes, needs to improve amongst younger age groups, and younger 16 and 17-year-olds within that, but it needs improvement across the board. So I've talked a bit about how 16 and 17-year-olds sit compared to other age groups, with the kind of key takeaway being that they're not that different than people under 55. But what about, that's taking 16 and 17-year-olds as kind of one collective block, right? But 16 and 17-year-olds can be very different. They come from very different places in Wales. So what are some of the key differences that we find? So looking at, starting with gender, one of the kind of key things that we see in terms of gender is that women are, across age groups, are consistently less confident in their knowledge of politics. So these two graphs here that say Wales and Westminster, what they show is we ask someone, how much do you know about Welsh politics? How much do you know about Westminster politics? Now, obviously, that doesn't actually tell you what they know. It just tells you how confident they feel about their knowledge. And across age groups, women consistently give lower lower responses indicating lower confidence in what they know about Welsh and Westminster politics, with the only exception being 16 and 17-year-olds. So this age group here, they are the group that, well, men and women do not seem different in their confidence. So if that can replicate over time, again, just to reiterate, this is one election, so we don't know how this will work over time, but there is some evidence here that the gender gaps in confidence about politics are not present for 16 and 17-year-olds, or were not present at that time. Where we do see some of the traditional gaps in Welsh politics reappearing is when we move on to the Welsh language. So the graph on my right shows the interest in the Senedd election by age and whether someone speaks Welsh. So the blue squares are whether someone speaks Welsh, and the red circles are whether someone doesn't. And you can see that across age groups, those who don't speak Welsh are consistently less interested in the Senedd election than those who do speak Welsh. Now, we might expect that because if someone who speaks Welsh, they might be more engaged in Wales as a civic space, but that might be something that people want to change and try and engage those who don't speak Welsh more in Welsh politics, given that the non-Welsh speaking population in Wales is quite large. And another point on this is that the gap is particularly large amongst younger people, with younger non-Welsh speakers being less engaged than the younger Welsh speakers. So that's somewhere where there needs to be improvement over time in trying to engage these younger non-Welsh speakers. We see a similar story for medium of education, with those in Welsh education being more engaged, but that again is probably because of this Welsh language effect. So I've talked a lot about the differences. This is something now where we just need to give a bit of a caveat about the results that we've shown. And please don't all go to sleep, because I'm going to start talking about sampling methodology in this room, so please stay with me. I'll make it brief. Basically, when we asked this survey, we got 16 and 17-year-olds into our sample in two different ways. Some of them were people who had signed up to the YouGov panel themselves, and some of them were people who their parents said, "Hiya, can you fill in this survey?" Now, you might expect that someone who is willing to go and sign themselves up to a survey where they answer questions about politics may be more engaged about politics than someone who's been tapped on the shoulder by their mum or dad and asked, "Hey, can you fill this in?" And that's exactly what we find. These two graphs here, the red bars are the people who signed themselves up, the blue bars are people who were pulled in by their parents. And we can see that those who were pulled in by their parents were much less likely to have discussed votes at 16, and they were also less interested in the Senedd election. So all with what we've shown about interest, it needs to be taken with a pinch of salt here, which is that our sample does include quite a lot of people who are maybe already interested, but not to kick ourselves too much, that's true of a lot of survey research, which relies on people signing up to surveys. So that's something where survey research in general, not just us, but survey research in general needs to kind of try and move forward when we're looking at younger age groups. So just to quickly summarise, just to stress again, this report should be considered a baseline for future studies. The Votes at 16 is about improving youth engagement in the long term, and we won't know whether it's been successful for a few elections. Votes at 16, in this instance, obviously was introduced in incredibly difficult circumstances, where there wasn't an education programme, and that education programme is considered so key for this policy to be a success that it needs to be introduced moving forward, especially considering how few young people said they talked about this in school or with their friends. With that in mind, we shouldn't be too downhearted, we shouldn't be too downbeat, because the knowledge of young people and the engagement of young people wasn't that dissimilar to other younger age groups. It's just that this knowledge of devolved politics and this interest in devolved politics needs to be improved across the board, with a particular focus really on non-Welsh speakers as somewhere that we can really improve moving forward. So with that in mind, our report has 5 recommendations which are here, which I just will quickly run through. Is that 2026 should be considered a fresh start for votes to 16. That is not just in terms of us going, right, great, let's see how it looks. That means also it needs selling again. It needs the education programme to go with it. It needs restarting. The work around improving political literacy needs to be extended beyond younger age groups, particularly for non-Welsh speakers. We need more research into youth engagement, and particularly we need to expand on survey research where we can look at 16 and 17-year-olds and other younger age groups in a lot more detail. So with that in mind, diolch yn fawr, thank you very much. Thank you for having us.